Good morning. It's great to see some new faces here and some returning snowbirds, so a special welcome to all of you who are visiting for the first time or coming back from your time away during the summer, so welcome. My name is Joni Padduck, and I'm your worship associate for today. I'm delighted to be serving alongside Reverend Ian and my dear friend LeGrand Velez. As we begin, we acknowledge that we are on the historic homelands of the various bands of Cahuilla people, and we honor the unique relationship that we hope emerges between our community and the indigenous people and their traditional territories. Let this acknowledgement serve as a reminder to recognize, honor, reconcile, and partner with the Cahuilla people whose lands and water we benefit from today. In this congregation, we welcome all people of all sexual orientations and gender identities, all ages and sizes, people of all economic statuses and professions, and all physical or mental abilities, people of all races and ancestries and cultures. We welcome you wherever you come from, whoever you love, whatever your immigration status or civic engagement. We welcome all those who will learn and grow with us as we commit together to embrace the rich and beautiful diversity of the world and to build a community centered in justice, compassion, and love. You are welcome here, and we're really glad you're with us this morning. It's important to us here in this community to create a safe and healthy environment for everyone who gathers in worship, including those who are immunocompromised or have other risk factors. Our COVID protocols about vaccination and mask use are in place because we wish to do everything we can to protect all of us. A reminder that masks covering your nose and mouth are required to attend in-person worship, preferably KN95 masks. If you arrived without one, I'm sure our welcome staff probably provided you with one. Thank you for that. We do have them available every Sunday at the welcome desk. Please choose to act for the health and safety of our community. Our service is always available streamed on our website if you need to observe from home, and I should have welcomed our people from home. I'm sorry I didn't do that. There are a couple of announcements this morning. The first one, have you signed up to walk in November 6th Pride Parade yet? We need more walkers to make this event successful. Sign up today after service or on the link in last Friday's newsletter. It's a really fun event. Bill and I have marched every year that UCOD has participated, but this year we're not able to. There's a sign-up sheet on the round table in the foyer, so please join us. It's really a lot of fun. Also, please see the newsletter for more details on the annual potluck Thanksgiving dinner open to members and friends who may not have family or friends in the area to share this holiday with. There's a sign-up sheet with some information on the round table in the foyer. And please plan on staying after coffee hour for Jerry and Suzanne's presentation of Journey into Buddhism in Bhutan, Hinduism in Kathmandu, Nepal, and Islam in India's Kashmir. And Jerry and Suzanne are seated right here. Welcome back. They've been traveling, as always. There will be extra snacks on the patio since the presentation will be up to about 2 hours. For those of you streaming today's service, you can watch the presentation on Zoom. Just look for the link on your order of worship that was emailed to you this morning. And Carol Lavoie, where are you at? Carol, did you want to say anything today about being the last Sunday before the auction? No, but that was good. If anyone has any questions about the silent auction or the live auction on Zoom, please see Carol. Everybody knows who Carol is, I think. Thanks, Carol. Let's see. And, oh yes, important, if you'd like to be on our email list to learn more about us and our services and our programming, please contact us at admin, that's ADMIN, at uucod.org. And now we will ring our Tibetan bowl to begin our service and listen to our music for centering.
Good morning and welcome. You have to do that twice a day, huh? However you found us, however many times you've been here in person or online, welcome. We are a congregation grounded in our commitment to love and an evolving tradition that celebrates the richness and beauty of individual lives and commits to working together to weave a tapestry made stronger and more vibrant by our collaboration and by the sharing of our lives and our visions for a thriving, loving, and just future for all of life. We gather as our ancestors gathered around a common flame together, finding safety and comfort in each other. We gather as our ancestors gathered to tell stories of their lives, to hear the stories of their people and of other peoples, and to learn, to see what made them who they are. Come, let us tell our stories and hear the stories of our ancestors and neighbors and kin. Come, let us see what makes us who we are. Come, let us worship together. We're going to start by singing together, which is always a wonderful way of coming together. We've sung our opening hymn, Where Do We Come From?, several times over the past few months, and I did that intentionally because I want us to learn it and to know it, because I think it's a wonderful, wonderful song. So we're going to stay seated for this. We're going to sing this hymn. If we could switch to the lyric slide, that would be great. We're going to sing each part. We're not going to sing part 4, so you can ignore part 4. But we're going to sing part 1 through twice, so to remind you how it goes. We'll sing part 2 through twice to remind you how it goes, and then part 3 through twice. And then I'm going to invite you to pick one. Whichever one you remember, whichever one your voice or your heart calls for you to sing, and you can switch. And we're just going to sing together for a little while until it feels like we're finished. Does that feel okay? So Jeff, could you give us So part 1 goes, if you remember, join with me as soon as you can. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Let's do that again. Where we go again. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we? Choose up here. Where do we come from? Where do we? Let's do that again. Where do we come from? Where do we come from? Part 3. Mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery. Life is a... Here we go. Sing and where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where do we... Now, any part you want to sing. Mystery, mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery.
And now please join me as we light our chalice with our words which will appear on the screen. Yesterday, our distant ancestors gathered round a flame to share their stories and find comfort. Tomorrow, our descendants will gather round a flame talking of a life we will never know. But today, it is we who gather here around this flame, seeking, believing, and being together. And now I'd like to invite Suzanne Hogsett up to light our BIOPOC candle. Please join me with the words that are on the screen. We light these candles in solidarity with Black, Indigenous, and other people of color as they journey toward spiritual wholeness. May we, as a beloved community, work to dismantle racism and all forms of oppression. May we live out our principles so that justice, dignity, and equity for all prevail.
Today's service is a little different. There is no sermon. You can celebrate that if you want. That's okay. It's okay. It's okay to have. We're going to, or you can mourn that. That's okay too. And today we're going to share a few stories, different kinds of stories, but all from people who came before us. Now, sometimes a story is just a story, something to be enjoyed, something to make us feel comfortable or happy. Think back for a moment to a favorite story that you were told when you were little by a parent, an older sibling, a grandparent, a teacher, a babysitter, a neighbor. Think about that story that you asked for over and over again. I can imagine that story and others like it live in your heart and are good memories for you. I'll encourage you to share those stories with each other during coffee hour. It's always nice to know some people have the same stories in their hearts that we do from growing up. Sometimes, though, stories do more than entertain us. Sometimes they shape us. They teach us about ourselves and the world. Stories that do that can be about fantastical things or about the people in our lives or those who came before us in our families. The stories can teach us about where we come from and about the wider world. And long before we had Google or the internet or movies or books or even paper to write on, we were telling stories to each other. And not just short stories, long epics and dramas and tragedies and adventures, repeated over and over again, often in language patterns that help the tellers remember the story and make it more memorable for the listener. One of the peoples that I come from Northern Europe, used beautiful patterns of language, kennings, they called them, to enliven their tales and make the stories sing. Repeated phrases, descriptions of people and things. The story I'm going to share now uses those kennings, those patterns, but it's also about them. Perhaps it was a way of remembering how to tell stories. And this story is called The Lay of Alvis. It comes from what we call the Poetic Edda. There once was a dwarf called Alvis, and Alvis was in love with Thrud. Unfortunately for Alvis, Thrud was the daughter of Thor, who was quite the most stubborn and grumpiest of the gods, and Thor did not approve of this relationship at all. And so one night he decided to confront Alvis, and this is what happened. "I," said Thor very slowly, and his eyes flashed, reminding everyone he was the god of thunder. "I am Thor the hurler. I am the wide wanderer, and I am Odin's son. You'll never win and marry my daughter if I can help it." "Ah," said Alvis, and smiled a pallid smile. "Ah, well, I'll soon win your goodwill and your consent. I love your daughter, and I will fight for her." "Wise guest," said Thor, "I won't be able to stand in the way of your love if you can answer whatever I ask you about all of the worlds. Tell me, Alvis, you're the dwarf, you're the one who knows everything about our fates and fortunes. What is the name for the land that stretches all around us? What is its name in each and every world?" "Well, humans call it Earth," the dwarf replied. "The Aesir gods say field, and the Vanir, other gods, say the ways. The giants name it Evergreen, and the elves Grower, the most holy gods call it clay. Think for a second about why someone might call the earth rower, or the way, or clay. Tell me, said Thor, Alvis, you're the dwarf who knows everything. What is the name of the moon, child of the ocean, that we can all see in each and every world? Well, humans call it moon, said Alvis, but the gods say mock sun. It's known in hell as whirling wheel. The giants name it rapid traveler, the dwarves gleamer, and the elves call it time teller. Think about why we might call the moon time teller. Tell me, Alvis, said Thor, you're the one who knows everything. What is the name for the sun that we can all see in each and every world? Well, humans, said Alvis, call it sun. The gods say orb, and the dwarves Dvalin's delight. The giants name it everbright, the elves fair wheel, and the sons of God all glowing. And the questions and the answers and the words went on all night, went on and on. Tell me, Alvis, said Thor, you're the dwarf who knows everything about our fates and fortunes. What is the name for the stillness, the settling peace in each and every world? Well, humans call it calm, said the dwarf. The gods say quiet, and the Vanir say the winds hush. The giants name it the sultry. The elves day's lull, and the dwarf call it day's refuge. And on the questions and answers went. Tell me, Alvis, said Thor, you're the dwarf who knows everything. What is the name for fire that burns for all of us in each and every world? Well, humans call it fire, the dwarf replied. The gods say flame, and the Vanir say wave. The giants name it hungry biter, and the dwarves burner. In hell, it is known as the hasty. Think about fire as wave, as hungry biter, as hasty. Finally, Thor said, I've never known one person to be the mind of so much ancient wisdom. He smiled at his guest, a long, slow, not actually very kind smile, and slowly nodded his head. But your own tongue has trapped you, Alvis. The sun's rays arrest you. Oh, I'm sorry. One thing I forgot to tell you at the beginning of the story is in this story, like many magical creatures, Alvis sometimes turned to stone if he was caught in the light of the morning sun. The dwarf whirled around, but it was already too late. The sun's rays arrest you, gloated Thor, and they turn you into stone, and now the sun shines in my hall again. Thor was kind of being tricky, wasn't he? Perhaps he learned from his half-brother Loki how to be tricksy rather than hit things with his hammer. He got Alvis to talk all night until it was too late. And Alvis was being pretty arrogant, ready to boast and show off, and he didn't pay attention to anything at all. But I wonder if we might think of times when we were so focused on ourselves that we didn't see what was going on around us. When we were so focused on what we wanted that we didn't see what was going on with the people around us. And I also wonder, what would happen if we paid attention to the words we used to describe things? That's our story. We're going to take a moment now, and Jeff will play and sing for us, and the ushers will collect our offering for the support of this congregation.
Hello, I'm LeGrand Velez. I'm a member of this congregation, longtime member of this congregation since 2006, and I'm going to share some of my ancestor stories. This is the story of my father's side of the family, the Einbinder family. Our great-great-grandmother was born in Odessa, Russia. Her name was Sarah. At age 18, she married Moishe Levin and subsequently had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. One of the girls was named Libby. Sorry. 1 second. Pardon me. Myself here. Thank you. Okay. One of the girls was named Libby, who has become our great-grandmother Libby Einbender. The family she was born into was of very comfortable means, with servants in the household. Her father, our great-great-grandfather, sold feed to the farmers in his Russian community and prospered. In his comfortable prosperity, he had dreams of bettering himself even more so. His dreams brought him to the United States in 1878, leaving his family behind in Russia. He purchased a farm in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn, New York, and shortly thereafter, he sent for the family he left behind in Odessa, Russia. These two financial investments put a considerable dent into his fortune, but most importantly, the family was together again. Misfortune soon came down upon them when their farm in Brooklyn was vandalized and their cattle were poisoned. Unable to cope with this disaster, as he also realized farming was not his best asset, he alone returned to Russia to reestablish his feed business. Moishe promised to send for the family to join him as soon as he could accumulate their passage money. Our great-great-grandmother sold the farm and moved in with relatives, and in time the family was again reunited in Russia. The traumatic events took its toll, however, on this ambitious man, and he died suddenly of what was then diagnosed as a broken heart. The family at this point found itself almost penniless and had to make many adjustments to survive. Our great-great-grandmother Levin became a midwife, which meant she had to spend weeks at a time in the home of the women whose babies she would be helping to deliver. Therefore, her children had to go live with relatives, so the family was separated. Our great-grandmother Libby went to live with an aunt when she was 16. And when she was 16, her grandfather arranged a marriage between she and what was to become our great-grandfather, Sam Einbender. Of Libby's 3 brothers, the oldest was killed while serving in the Russian army. Her brother Louis migrated to China, and Abraham to Egypt. So perhaps I have relatives in China and Egypt I don't even know about. Great-grandmother Libby married Sam Einbender against her will. She was 16 years of age, and he was 28. She was 5 feet 4 inches tall. Sam was a mere 5 feet 2 inches. Sam was well-groomed, an impeccable dresser, but not good-looking enough to suit her fancy. Excuse me. He was financially stable and able to make her life virtually free from monetary worries and provided her with many comforts. They were married 10 months when they had their first child, a son, that was to be the first of 6 children. Sam Einbender owned a fleet of horse-drawn buggies that were used as cabs. Great-grandpa worked sunup to sundown. They were a religious Jewish family observing the Sabbath from Friday evening at sundown until Saturday evening at sundown. Sunday began their working day. Life in Odessa was very beautiful for them. Then all of a sudden, without warning, they would hear shooting and rioting. As the shooting came closer to the area, they were informed that the rioting was coming closer to them and that they would have to seek shelter because their lives were in danger. This was the time of the pogrom, when people were out to annihilate the Jews. Their non-Jewish friends provided them with shelter, and the first time this occurred. The second time, they had to seek shelter with a good friend who was a captain in the Russian army. He provided them with shelter in the sub-basement of his home, knowing full well that if this were ever known, he assisted in sheltering a Jewish family, he would be executed. The Russian army had demolished their home and everything in it. They had taken their silver and metal pieces with them to the shelter to convert into whatever assets they could. Grandpa's business ceased when they took shelter. If they wanted to go on living, they would have to leave Russia and head for the United States. They converted their silver and metal pieces into money and left for the United States. They were a family of 4 at this time, 3 boys and 1 girl born in Russia. There were 2 girls to be born in the United States. Fortunately, they were able to leave Russia without any problems, shadowing their departure. And my great-grandfather, Jack, was one of those boys. To get better food during their passes on the ship, they had to do plenty of bribing. Those who had money were fortunate to eat, and those traveling penniless were not given even a bare minimum. Conditions on the boat were terrible and very crowded. Those who had more would share with families having less. The voyage took 3 weeks. All the travelers were concerned with the same fears and anxieties of the unknown. What would they do when they got there? Where would they stay? Most of the people coming over knew of someone in the States or else knew of someone who knew someone. So although they came alone, they all had a contact once they landed. There was a tremendous feeling for one another, a kind of camaraderie. For the first few weeks after they arrived, Great-Grandma Libby and Great-Grandpa Sam, along with their 4 children, moved in with a cousin. Great-Grandpa was told that the only business he could get into was the peddling business. He would have to take a push cart and buy fruit and peddle it on the streets. They stayed with their cousins just until they could find an apartment, which they did on the Lower East Side. They purchased beds and only the bare necessities. Interestingly, typical of the time was to have a candle in the bedroom used to relax on during the day and used for a bed at night. This was included as a necessity for the household. Sam didn't stay in the peddling business too long. He started a small business selling gasoline to peddlers. The peddlers did a lot of their peddling at night when it was dark, and the only light they had was the gasoline from their gas lamps. He was the first representative for Standard Oil Company selling gasoline on the Lower East Side. He created this job for himself, distributor Samuel Einbender for Standard Oil Company products. Our great-grandparents' social life was based around the home. Saturday afternoons were set aside for visiting or being visited. Friends would get together to drink tea and have cookies and chat away the afternoon. Very often, they would stay over one another's homes, socializing. Libby and Sam believed it was very important for the children to have an education and insisted that they go to high school. Many young people were leaving high school just to get a job. The Einbender boys all had a desire to be in business for themselves, even if it were only to own a candy store. Money in the bank was their security. It was important to them that they have a big nest egg so they would never have to borrow in case of illness or bad times. It came to pass that the peddlers were forbidden to sell their wares at night. This meant great-grandfather had no market to distribute his oil, and Standard Oil Company offered to set him up in business, but he felt he could not do it alone, and his sons were not interested in that business. Thus, he turned down the offer. In time, he went into the candy store business and remained with the store until 1942. That is my father's story.
Thank you for that. And thank you to all of you for your generosity and the support of this congregation. Your financial resources really do help us have our own nest egg so that we can make sure that this place runs and that this place has the resources it needs to do our work in the world. This is the time in our service where we share the joys and sorrows of our congregations, those things which are in our hearts and minds. We light a candle sending love and peace to Jean and to Evelyn, offer prayers and hold Evelyn in our heart during her medical challenge, and wish great strength for Jean. We light a candle of love to Jack for his journey through surgery and healing. Our prayers for his recovery are for a gentle, easy, get better time. The hospitality team lights a candle of deep gratitude for all the help in the kitchen yesterday as we prepared a special hospitality service in honor of Patty Gallagher. Blessings to all. and a candle of gratitude for the hospitality team from the care team for making that happen yesterday. And a big round of thanks from me to all of you who helped make yesterday possible, especially to our choir and all those who helped with the food. The family was really moved and touched by the way that we took care of them and the way that we honored and celebrated Patty yesterday, so thank you. Margaret and Sandy light a candle in love and light. We remember, they say, our dear friend Linda, who died 2 days ago in Amherst, Massachusetts. We will always remember her life as a blessing to us, they say. And Claudia lights a candle acknowledging the trials and tribulations we are all experiencing and wishing all peace and calmness as we walk through murky waters. These are the joys and sorrows we have shared out loud today, and we know that there are those that are in our hearts, in our minds, those joys and sorrows that live in our spirits and that live quietly in our bodies. And so we pause for a moment now. We pause in gratitude for this community, gratitude for the connections which allow us to celebrate more vibrantly, to grieve more lovingly, and to know that we are not alone as we face the challenges of our world. A world that is seemingly full of violence, shootings, riotings, and protests, and repression. This is the world we move through these days. And it is also a world of connection, of love, of natural and human beauty, a world where we know that we are not alone. And so we pause in quiet reflection for a time of quiet as we breathe in the love of this place and breathe out the hope for peace for all. May all beings know peace. May all beings know an end to suffering. May all beings know love. Sometimes stories tell us who we are, who we came from, the people who brought us into this world. Sometimes those stories bring us hope. They tell us where our determination comes from. But sometimes stories tell us how not to be. My father-in-law, George Harrower, once told me about told me a story about his grandfather and a tomato. Now, George's father emigrated to Canada from Scotland just before the First World War, traveling there on a ticket his older brother had bought for him, a ticket that I think probably cost $1 or $2, which for us is nothing, but for that family was a huge amount of money. Bought him a ticket and said, "Here, don't come back." Not because he didn't like his brother, but because he, at least that's what George says. Anyway, George remembers his father, the one who was bought the ticket for. Remember his father, who became a minister in small-town Ontario. His father telling him the story of his Scottish family's first and only encounter with a tomato. Now, think about it, rural Scotland, we live in Southern California with tomatoes everywhere. In rural Scotland in the late 19th century, tomatoes were a rarity, something strange and unfamiliar from the New World. George's father remembers the arrival of the first tomato his family had ever seen, brought into their home like the Holy Grail and laid on the kitchen table. The family gathered round. It wasn't an apple. Wasn't a potato. What was it? What did it taste like? Well, this being the 1880s, the responsibility and the right to taste this new wonder fell, of course, to the patriarch of the clan, George's grandfather. So, with the family gathered expectantly round the table, George's grandfather took his knife, took a chunk out of the side of the tomato, and put it in his mouth. A moment later, he spat it out, made a disgusted face, and proclaimed this tomato, this thing, wasn't fit for human consumption. And presumably no more tomatoes were ever brought into that house. You can imagine the tomato that found its way to a small town in Scotland in the 1880s. But now, George, my father-in-law, clearly did not share his grandfather's skepticism about tomatoes. In fact, he loved them. He shared this story with me over a tomato salad that we'd made together for our regular Sunday dinner when we were all living in Victoria. And also, George notably did not share his grandfather's stubbornness about new things. George was one of the most curious lovers of learning I have ever met, always teaching himself new things and new ways to do things. He learned a lesson from that tomato, how he didn't want to go through life. And he shared that thirst of knowledge and learning and that tomato salad with everybody around him. I'm going to invite us to sing together as we stay seated. We sing our hymns for meditation, Spirit of Life, and Fuente de Amor.
Hello again. Now I'm going to share a story from my mother's side of the family. And it's not so old, it's more contemporaneous. But anyways, let me tell you about my mother, Andrea Einbeder Velez. She was born in Puerto Rico, and she was raised on a farm for the first 6 years of her life. In the mountains of Puerto Rico, where she was malnourished. She recalled having a distended stomach for the first years of her life. And then they moved to a pueblo called Añasco. My mother's mother was mentally unstable, and my mother has a memory of her where she thought she was trying to kill her. She was torturing her and wouldn't stop, and she couldn't breathe, and my mother thought her life was in jeopardy. She was unstable and left, and my mother was raised by her father. So my mother never really had a mother to teach her. My mom only went to school through the 9th grade. Nevertheless, she had a true intellectual curiosity and was a voracious reader her entire life and very much self-educated. She married when she was 17, and she married, obviously, a Puerto Rican man who, I guess, tried to control her. And the title of this segment I called Fuerza y Fuego Femenino Boricua, which the translation is Fire and Power of Puerto Rican Women. And my mother was a classic Puerto Rican woman and full of fire. And so she married when she was 17, and I guess this man tried to control her or treat her, that she wasn't going to be an equal partner, and she was having none of it. She had long hair. In fact, I never knew anybody whose hair grew faster than my mother's, but that was kind of her husband's pride and joy, so she cut it all off. And he was a guitar player, and he had a guitar made by the most famous guitar maker in Puerto Rico, which she smashed. So the marriage was annulled, and she left to the United States and never looked back. She married my father, Leonard Einbender, and they moved to Phoenix, Arizona, and raised four boys in the Mormon church. And LeGrand, my first name, is a Mormon name. As it turns out, while my mother was pregnant with me, her niece from Puerto Rico came to live with my family, supposedly learn English. Anyway, my father had an affair with my mother's niece, who was 18. And when my mom busted the affair, she, told her niece she had to move out. And my father got her a job in an apartment, and she became pregnant. And so when she became pregnant, she moved to New York, back to New York with the intention of having an abortion, but she didn't. And this affair really alienated my mother from the rest of her family in Puerto Rico. There was a lot of hard feelings towards my father, as you can imagine. So my cousin, Zuma, had a child, Bobby, and Zuma died in a fire and in New York when Bobby was less than 2 years old. And the only reason Bobby survived is because she wrapped herself around her infant child. And he ended up being raised in Puerto Rico and had regular plastic surgery operations throughout his life because his skin did not stretch and grow. We never knew about Bobby, and Bobby never knew about us until much, much later in life. And finally, my mom was in Puerto Rico, and she saw Bobby, and seeing he was an adult, and told him that his father was her ex-husband, he was already deceased at the time, and that he had 4 brothers. He never knew any of this. The only thing anybody had ever told him about his father is that he was a Jew, period. So when we found out about Bobby, I started corresponding with him, and eventually went to Puerto Rico to meet him. And so I'm one of 5 boys, including my 3/4 brother, Bobby. And we all take after my father, look as far as our looks. And Bobby looked more like my dad than any of us. It was mind-blowing to go and meet this person in Puerto Rico who grew up a completely different world, and he was just like me and my brothers, just like us, in so many ways. And with time, timer from going off here. So I went to meet Bobby. Bobby came to the United States for a family reunion in New York, met the rest of the family. And then in 2000, I hosted a family reunion in Olympia, Washington. Bobby came out with his wife and 4 children and spent a week together with my family. And it was, like I said, he was just, even though we grew up worlds apart, he was just like the rest of us. Basically nice, but a little bit crazy. That's us. And shortly after that, Bobby passed away in an automobile accident. And one of the greatest things I'm most proud of was, was to host that family reunion where we all got to spend time together and become family before Bobby passed. And there was no resentment on the part of my mother. He was just another son as far as she was concerned. And thanks to the blessing of Facebook, I'm in touch with my nephews and nieces in Puerto Rico. And so that's the story, incredible story of my brother Bobby and my mother.
Thank you, LeGrand. In so many ways, these stories of who we are and where we come from, the people who came before us, the cultures that we grew out of, inform us, even if it's because we react against them. So we're going to sing together now. We're going to sing our closing hymn, number 1051, We Are. I invite you to rise in body or in spirit as we sing together. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are our grandmother's prayer, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of our ancestors. We are the spirit of, we are mothers of courage and fathers of time. We are daughters of dust and the sons of great vision. We're sisters of mercy and brothers of love. We are lovers of life and the builders of nature. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith. We are makers of peace and the wisdom of age. We are our grandfather's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreaming. We are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. For each child that's born, the morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are.
Now please join me for extinguishing our chalice with the words on the screen. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
So many of the stories we told when we were little, that we were told when we were little, ended with, and they lived happily ever after. That made us, most of us anyway, feel safe and content and good most of the time. But there are stories we know, stories we hear, stories we tell that really don't have an ending. They invite a beginning. They invite us to see ourselves differently, to understand better where our ancestors and theirs come from, to see more clearly how the world works and our place in making it better, brighter, and more beautiful. As we head back into our daily world, let's keep our ears open for those stories, and our hearts and our minds and our spirits and our bodies open and ready for the possibilities that they show us. Go in peace, my friends, to love and serve the world.